Looks like we're ready. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so we are continuing in our series about focusing on the difference makers, something which I believe is central to our journey of faith, about being difference makers. I think it's at the heart of it. I think if we miss this ingredient, we're not doing this life properly, in all honesty, where we're doing part of the life, but not the whole bit. It's not the whole recipe. There's an ingredient, a vital ingredient missing if we don't think about this issue of difference making. Because for me, when we think about who God is and what God is about, we think about this, that through his actions, he changed the world. He brought Jesus onto the earth to make a difference, to be the ultimate difference maker. And we looked at that, didn't we, a few weeks ago. And he has commissioned us. Jesus has commissioned us to be difference makers. You can't hide from it. Maybe today you kind of thought, well, you know what? Maybe I just need to hide away and just, no, there's no hiding place. Jesus says, you've got to be difference makers. It inspires us to be difference makers. So today I want to talk about this. I've headlined my message this. Be the difference to make a difference. Be the difference to make a difference. And I really want to focus on the makeup of a difference maker. We've looked at the whole idea of the origin story of a difference maker, what makes a difference maker, what's the journey they come to get to becoming a difference maker. We've looked at a couple of accounts in the Bible of people. We're going to look at another one now as well, because I want to focus on this idea of being a difference maker. See, what makes a difference maker? What's the key part of their story, their origin story? What's one of the ingredients? I think is this. So the answer to the above question, what is a difference maker? What makes a difference maker? It's really quite simple. They make a difference. Wow, that's complicated, isn't it? I was just about to kind of thought I was going to go down a whole theological line there, and no, quite simple. A difference maker makes a difference. Quite simple, isn't it? And Acts 13 talks about this, the legacy of King David. The legacy of King David says this, and I love this because I love this to be said about me. I humbly would like this to be said about me. And I work towards that even now. I'm nowhere near finished. I've got so much to do. So Acts 13 verse 36 says this about David. It says, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep. Died, in other words. Biblical euphemism for died. He fell asleep. He was buried with his ancestors and his body decayed. So David had served God's purpose in his generation. I want it to be said about us, serve God's purpose in his generation. And God's purpose is to make a difference. Make a difference. This world that he created, he wants to make a difference to it. The things that he doesn't like, he wants to make a difference to it. He's constantly working. That's constantly on his agenda. You see, the power of making a difference speaks for itself, doesn't it? The difference-making life speaks for itself, doesn't it? When you hear people talked about, and I've been to funerals of people who made a difference, and the accounts are just endless, and there isn't enough time, usually in the tight time slot you have of a funeral, to be able to talk all about that. It's normally hours and hours of time, and people take weeks and months to talk about the legacy of people that have made a difference. It can be endless, because it speaks for itself, because people who have come in contact with them, people who are being changed by them, they know what it is. They know what it is, they know what they've experienced. For King David, his legacy spoke for itself. And that's why that statement was made about him. So, here's the big reveal. This statement here I'm going to make about the power of making a difference and the key factor of being a difference maker. The starting point is this. Simply this. Be different. Wow. That's deep, isn't it? Okay, I'll stop there. I'll finish now. Thanks, everyone. We'll pray and you can all go home. Simple, isn't it? Be different. See, this is important. This really is important because in this life that we have, we only have so long. And there is the necessity to create an image of God that is God. Not it's us, but it's Him. And then we show it through us. So I want to explore the life of Daniel. I want to explore the life of Daniel when we think about this whole idea of being different. And somebody who was different. And was a difference maker. But a key part of him being a difference maker was the fact that he was different. So let's look at Daniel 1. We'll read from chapter 1. And quite a bit to go through here, so we'll move along fairly quickly. Daniel chapter 1. We want to explore his life and his associates, his friends, as well. We know about his friends, don't we? We're going to read about them in a second. So, in the year of the reign, here's the context, the lead up. This is part of the origin story for Daniel. So, in the year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Basically, just, tactic got down there, just, right, okay, I'm here, you can't go anywhere, I'm the man, I'm over you. So, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome. Sorry, see, there were too many laughs there. I saw little smiles when I said showing aptitude. More laughter, no, good. Of every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Says he was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. And here we get up to now the introduction of Daniel. We're in the film, this is the film scene now. We now kind of pan to Daniel and his associates, his friends. It says, among those who were chosen from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names to Daniel, the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. I'm really not going to try and do that too many more times. So just assume that those are the names. We know the names there, don't we? You've got them recorded in your brains, haven't we? So these are the principal characters here. So the context here for Daniel, as an origin story, is that he was taken effectively into slavery. That's what was happening. His nation, as was a pattern in the Bible, as you'll see quite often, if you've read it for yourselves, you'll see that this pattern that the nation of God's nation were taken into slavery by other nations, to teach them a lesson, to say, you need to pay attention to God, come back to God, everything will be okay when you come back to God. When you don't, when you're not under God's covering, this is what happens. So this is one of those occasions. And Daniel's in this context here of having grown up, and then all of a sudden his nation is in slavery. What's going on? My nation is I'm now kind of being taken, conscripted is what happened effectively. He was conscripted. You go back to war times, people were drafted and conscripted into the army. In other words, this is your duty, you don't have a choice. Now this is before my time. I didn't grow up in these times, but I know that we've heard accounts of people that grew up in these times where all of a sudden you would receive a message saying, your time's up, you're going to go and serve. Serious thing. So Daniel was in this position where he's now got to go and serve. It was part of the subjugation, it was part of the domination, the indoctrination tactics. This was part of warfare tactics for nations. That if you go to a nation and you dominate them, it's one thing to put them in slavery, but it's another thing now to actually really take their best people and turn them around and indoctrinate them with your philosophy, your theology, your way of doing things. This is how you truly conquer a nation. And this is what they were doing. This was the tactic that was going on. I remember the film Conan. If anybody remembers the film Conan, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, 1982, I grew up with that. And I remember there was a scene there where Conan has been taken into slavery. He's a barbarian, and so he's fighting for the sake of others and for their pleasure and entertainment and so on. And he sat there, and his slave owners are talking to other slave owners and saying, oh, listen, what's best in life to do? What's the best thing in life to do? And Conan sat there just silently, just doing as he's told, this big kind of hulking. If you remember the scene, those of you who remember it, and he's there kind of looking impressive, but he's not saying a word because he's doing as he's told, he's sitting but as soon as the person asks him, what's best in life to do? And they're laughing and joking, obviously, probably having a bit of a drink, and they're like, let me tell you what's best to do. Conan, and they refer to Conan. And Conan, without missing a beat, says to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their children, or their women, I think it is. Just like that. Because he'd been indoctrinated. He'd been taught this by rote. And so he came up with it very easily because he'd been told it numerous times. And so the slave owner knew that when he said it to him, he knew he was going to come up with that right answer. Whether he believed in it or not, he'd been indoctrinated in this way. He had no way of his own, no thoughts of his own. He now only had the thoughts of his slave owner. So this was Daniel. This was Daniel's future, was to be indoctrinated. This was the tactic. This was what was being laid out for him. So the level of indoctrination, you can see it there from the character of Conan, is that he's just, that's it. You're going to say this by rote. You're going to say what I want you to say. Now Daniel was in this position where He's now part of this order of manufactured people. So he's got no freedom, no choices, nowhere to turn. What's he going to do? For those of you who are maybe Star Trekians, you remember the Borg. You will be assimilated. This is what's happening. He's being assimilated into the Babylonian culture. No choices. So we come to verse 8 now of Daniel 1. This is the context of Daniel, the difference maker. He is being asked to be part of the troops, be like everyone else, say what everyone else says, say what we want you to say. So the message to him was, don't be different, be like us. Don't be different, be like us. So now we get to verse 8 of Daniel 1. So in the context of all of this, Daniel thinks to himself this, but, in verse 8, Daniel 1, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. So straight away, Daniel's now made a choice. I'm going to be different. I'm going to be different. This is not really the wise choice to make in his context. But he did it. Because he had a passion about him. He had an inner conviction that said, I have to be different. I'm being told not to be, but I'm going to be different. Now, did I think that his agenda was, I'm going to be a difference maker, I'm going to transform? No, it wasn't at this point. I'm not going to pretend to you that I think it was. But I think the qualities of being a difference maker began with him taking this stand. It began with him saying, I'm going to be different. So it says that he resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself. Now I love this, verse 9. It says, now God had caused the official to show favour and compassion to Daniel. Love that. But the official, in verse 10, in other words, in short, the official was scared. He said, if I do this, I'm going to be in trouble with my bosses. Just, I need to be careful. Verse 11, Daniel said to the guard, said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel and his associates. Notice that? Didn't read their names, his associates. That's what we're going to call them. Please test your servants for 10 days. In other words, give us a go. Just see how it goes. I know you're worried, I know you're scared, I know your bosses are on your case, but just try us, honestly, try it. And you can imagine, sweat on you, probably whisper to him, listen, just try us out, please. Help us out, do me a favour. And God had given him a favourite position. And I believe the favour that God had given him was because he'd already decided to take a stand, to say, I'm going to be different. So God said, okay, I'm going to create the circumstances to help you in this. So he had favour. So verse 14 of Daniel 1, he agreed. The official agreed to test him for 10 days. He said, okay, all right, you be different for 10 days. We'll let you be different. See, Daniel put himself and his friends, he and his friends put themselves in the frame. They crossed hairs with their captors. They were in the crosshairs of their captors. No hiding place, that's it. Maybe it seemed to be done in secret, but the point is, if this goes wrong, the consequences are big. So now we come to verse 15 and 16. I love this, Daniel 1. The result of their little test to be different is this. And at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine, and they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Vegetables. Yeah, that's their choice, vegetables. But the point is this. Being different made a difference. There was no denying the difference it made. You see, we can learn God's ways, and this is what Daniel was doing, he's following God's ways, he was being different and being different from everyone else. Daniel and his friends were being different from everyone else, following God's ways, not the Babylonian ways. The payoff was this, is that they showed that actually, this is the way to go. This is the way to go. It led him to success, it led him to favour and to fulfilment. See, Daniel showed that the way of faith, he showed the way of faith to his captors. He showed this is what the way of faith, this is what being different can do. Your way is great, but look at my way. In other words, look at God's way, is what Daniel and his friends did. They said, look at God's way. Couldn't be questioned. You couldn't say, oh, well, do you know what, that's a fluke. You only did it for 1 day, no, 10 days. And if they wanted to do it for 15 and 20, they were allowed to. And they were in better health than everyone else. See, the idea was that we give them our food, we give them our nutrients, where we're going to be responsible for their nutrition. And Daniel said, no, I'm going to do this the right way. And I'm going to show you, actually, look at what happens when you do things God's way. Now, that wasn't his message. He didn't say that. He just lived it. Do you understand? He lived it, so he was different. He was being different. He wasn't preaching out to people saying, oh, you need to follow this way and you need to do this way. No, he just was different. And through being different, he was making a difference because he was showing that actually there's a different way. There's a different way. I'm showing you it because I'm living it. Don't watch what I say, watch what I'm doing and see what God can do. Look at this. So we lead on to another story now. Let's jump to chapter 3. This is just one account. Let's jump to chapter 3 of Daniel. Daniel and his friends taking now the stand, taking a great stand. Again, if you know this story, context here, the king Nebuchadnezzar is a little bit, he gets things wrong quite often, Nebuchadnezzar, because he's just, It says in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, that Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, etc., and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So again, King Nebuchadnezzar is trying to set a trend here. He's trying to set the way of being an idol worship, in other words. He's saying, look, this is what needs to happen. He says, he got all these officials together to dedicate this image that he'd set up. And then he said this, in verse 4, the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, etc., and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Whew. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped. Now, we have another situation where Daniel was faced with a situation where he has to do what everyone else does. Do what everyone else does. And the stakes are high now. The stakes are really high. The stakes in the first situation were a bit unknown because there was no threat attached to, well, if you don't eat my food, this is what's going to happen. There's now a specific threat attached to what will happen if you don't be like everyone else. If you're not like everyone else, this is what will happen. It's another test of his difference maker credentials, I believe. The lead up to this is about his difference maker credentials. How is he going to respond to this? He had a choice to make. Will he be different or will he go with the flow? Because the stakes are high. They're seriously high. See, the king was flexing his muscles. He was trying to show his level of domination. I'm the man, I'm dominant. I'd say actually he's showing a bit of control freak tendencies, a bit of control freak. Anybody who's maybe, kind of likes everything done their way, just don't look at anybody if you're that way inclined to like it your way. But this is the king here. It's other ways, it's the king's way or it's death. It's not really much of a choice, is it? King's way or death. That's what he was setting it up as. I look at this and I think to myself, as they would say in the modern vernacular, as the young people I used to work with would say, calm down, bruv. Calm down, it's not that deep. It's just not that deep. You're being a bit extra, aren't you? Come on. When you tell them something, you say, no, you shouldn't do that, or that's against the law. Calm down, bruv. This is the kind of thing that would come back to me. This is what I think of when I think about what the king's doing. It's like, this is a bit much, isn't it? If they don't do this, you're going to kill them. Whoo, easy, easy. But he continues on. So Daniel is in this situation, he's got to be different. Or has he? He's got to make a choice. Now, what I love about this is that when we get to verses 8 of Daniel 3, the astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. So in other words, there was a plot against them. A plot against them to say, look, do you know what? They're being different. I don't like the fact they're being different. And it says in verse 9 of Daniel 3, they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever, bowing and scraping and ingratiating themselves to him first of all, because they had a plot in mind. Verse 10, your majesty has issued a decree that everyone should hear the sound of the horn, etc., and so on, and should fall down and worship. And that whoever does not will be thrown into the furnace. But some Jews, whom you have set over your affairs, in other words, the ones you've given responsibility to, you've given them a bit of responsibility, you've made them bosses. They're not doing it, they're not paying attention, they're not being like everyone else. You told everyone to be the same, and they're not being the same, they're being different. How dare they? What are you going to do about it, in other words? What are you going to do about it? See, Daniel and his friends, his fellow captors, they're called out for their defiance of the king. That's what they do. People grasped on them, basically. Grasped on them, told on them. I get this in my household quite often. Mom, Dad, so-and-so did this, so-and-so hit me, so-and-so said this. Happens in my house quite often. I'm sure many of you can relate to this as parents of children, young children. It's this kind of, oh, they did this. Well, this is high level, they did this, or they're not doing what you're supposed to. This is high level stuff because the stakes are high. It's no joke now. Daniel and his friends are in trouble. So, verse 16 says this. Daniel's friends replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Take that, king. Whatever happens, we're not doing it. We're not being like everyone else. We're going to be different. So whether you kill us or not, doesn't matter. Our God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to do it. Sorry, king. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the rubber of being different hits the road. They've taken a stand. There's no coming back from this. In chess terms, they've taken their hand off the piece. You know when you're playing chess and you put your hand down? We had a game today yesterday. It was a great day. You put your hand on it, and then the rule is if you take your hand off the chess piece, that's it. You've committed to that move. Well, they've done that. They've moved their chess piece now, taken their hand off. There's no going back. In poker, they've removed their hands from the hand they put down. The cards have been put down, they've removed their hands. That's it. You're all in. You know when you say I'm all in poker, if anybody's played poker, they're all in now. They're all in. They've let go of the aeroplane on the sky ride. If they're doing a sky, one of the skydives, they've let go of the aeroplane now. That's it. All they're relying on is the parachute. Parachute's gone. Pretty good parachute, isn't it? Nothing else to do but just free fall. King's response is unsurprising to this, isn't it? Because he set things up to say, do you know what? You're supposed to do things my way. You're supposed to do what everyone else is doing, and you're not. So therefore, verse 19 to 23, we see that he basically loses his mind. And he says, right, that's it. You're going in the furnace. Verses 19 to 23, if you read it for yourself, he says, you're going in the furnace. That's it. Can't have it. Can't have it. This is defiance. This is what it's like in my house sometimes. I'm the one that said, right, my way or the highway, that's it. You're going in the furnace. That's it. Off you go. No, not really. Yes, stay on. This the one. But this is what's going on. And now that's it. There's no escape. They're going to go into the flames. What I love about this, verse 24 we're going to get to now, chapter 3. So they're being different now, and they've even told the king, we're going to be different. There's no escape, there's no hiding. They put themselves out there. Verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that were tied up and thrown into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods. Now, there's a whole other message we could go into from that. There's a lot in that, but here's the point. 3 men walking around in the flames. 4 that you saw, actually, and we know theologically that what was going on there is about God being with them. It says in verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouting, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High, come out, come here. Let me see you. I want to see what's going on here. You're supposed to have burnt up. I want to see what's going on here. So they come up. And all of the advisors crowded around them. What's going on? And they saw that no fire, this is verse 27, they saw that no fire had harmed their bodies. No hair had been singed. That'd be okay in my case, otherwise there. It says their robes were not scorched, no smell of fire. How is this possible? They took a stand and they got away with it. They stood up against the king and they got away with it. This is outrageous. This is outrageous. But they did it. Verse 28, love this. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Daniel's friends, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, this is verse 21, Meshach and Abednego, be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Daniel's friends in the province of Babylon. This is wild stuff. So The most they did is said, we're going to be different. We're going to be different. They weren't preaching the gospel, they weren't saying be saved, they were just saying, as for us, this is what we're going to do. And in God, in his way, showed them the miraculous. So there's 5 things here in particular that come out from this story, this particular account that we can see. Number 1, they stood against the regime on behalf of God, despite the consequences being different. They stood against the regime on behalf of God, despite the consequences, just whatever. If we die, we die. If we die, we die. Verses 16 and 17. Revelation 12, verse 11 says this: they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. It talks about the faithful ones. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. This is Daniel and his friends did not love their lives so much. They didn't shrink from death. They were different despite the consequences. Number 2, the king was witness to a miracle of God's favour and protection towards those who honor him. He was witness to that. There was no denying what he saw. Those who lived devoted to God, not a false God, but the real God, this is what happens, verses 24 to 27. He was witness to it. He saw it with his own eyes. Couldn't deny it. Number 3, I love this. This, I think, is brilliant, which we just read. He publicly acknowledges the greatness of God. This is the godless, pagan, kind of, he's following another gods altogether. He's making up his own gods. He praises God because Daniel and his friends chose to be different. Because they were different. And so a king, a faithless king, a heathen king, praised God. Come on. Number 4, love this. The king established new laws to support his newfound honour of God, his newfound respect for God. He set new laws in place because of the difference that Daniel and his friends made. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, because of the stand that they took in that particular story and the stand before that Daniel made. He changed the laws. And then number 5, they're promoted. They're promoted. Love that. Proverbs 15 verse 24 says, the path of life, or path of the righteous, leads them upwards. Yeah, so the path of life leads upwards for the wise. They leave the grave behind. They leave death, in other words, behind. It says their path is upwards. Or in other words, versions it says, the way of the righteous winds upwards. So even in their being different, putting themselves on the line, putting themselves under threat, actually what happened is they got promoted. The king said, thank you, you showed me up. But you know what? I can't deny what I saw. Have a promotion. And your God, he's the greatest God. I'm going to tell everyone he's the greatest God because I've seen what I've seen. Why? Because they took a stand and they were different. And so they were difference makers by being different. They made a difference to a king. They made a difference to a nation because they showed what God can do. It wasn't the king's commands that were seen as being sovereign, it was the real God. He was the one that came out as being the one. The one. And the king couldn't deny that. The king couldn't deny that. He had to bow down and surrender. They had a moment to shine, and they went from being hated and targeted by the king to being favoured and blessed. Under a foreign regime, by the way. So under a foreign regime where they were subjugated and under the control of others, they became favoured and blessed because they took a stand and said, I'll be different. How much more could that be the case for you? That if you take a stand, maybe where you haven't done before, you say, I'm going to be different. You do it. So finally, and very briefly here, Daniel 6. The last story, the significant story here in Daniel in particular, looking at his ability to be difference makers. For time, I'm going to summarise here because you'll know it well. Daniel and the lion's den. This is something that, if you've been in church, growing up in church, you would have heard this from a child. From Sunday school times, you would have heard this story. Daniel and the lion's den. It's brilliant. What I love about this is the common thread here of the stand that's taken, the difference making, the desire to be different, the stand to be different. So to summarise here, Daniel 6 now. We now have a new king. A new king is in place now. So the previous king has gone, and it's now a new king. The old king got killed, basically, got taken out. And the new king's come in place now. So Daniel's still part of this. He's still in this situation, and he's now under a new regime, a new king, new commands. And this is Daniel, but even in that, Daniel distinguishes himself. He shows himself to be great and worthy to the new king. And so he's put in line for a promotion under the new regime. But unfortunately, the people he's working with, his fellow colleagues, I'm summarising here, his fellow colleagues, they get jealous of him. In other words, they get jealous. They see that he's being promoted, and what's going on with this guy? Come on. We need to try and do something, but he's so perfect. We need to find something to get him on. We need to find something to get him on. So we're going to get him on something that's to do with the law of God, because we know we'll get him on that. So in other words, because we know he's going to be different, we're going to get him on that. Because of what he should be doing, we know the king won't like that. So they got him thrown into the lion's den, because again, it was another situation where the king had set up a situation, they had ingratiated themselves to the king, and they said, oh look, why don't you set up a situation where, look, if people don't do this, if they don't honor and bow down at the right time, then they get thrown into the lion's den. So now it's not a furnace, it's a lion's den. The result is the same, it's death. So it's my way, same king, or a different king, but same difference. Same thing. Do it my way or you die. And so Daniel again is presented with this scenario of do it the king's way or do it God's way, and what we're going to do. So in this context, we now come to, he's now in the lion's den. This is verse 19 of Daniel 6. So all that lead up, that's all the lead up, just a very brief synopsis of the lead up. Verse 19. Now here's the thing, the king liked Daniel. So in the context of this, he reluctantly had put him into the lion's den. Because he'd been tricked by these other guys, who set up there, and he'd really been tricked and played. He didn't really want to put, but he couldn't do anything else because he was stuck. He's like, well, Daniel, you're not doing what everyone else should do, so I've got to put you in the lion's den. And now we get to verse 19 of chapter 6. It says, at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. He hurried because he was concerned. He was like, what's happened to him? I really hope it's gone away. Verse 20, when he came near to the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continuously, been able to rescue you from the lions? It's just like, I had to throw you in there, but I hope you survived. I'm sorry, I didn't want to do it, but I had to. Did you survive? Verse 21, Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong to you, Your Majesty. I didn't do anything, Your Majesty. I didn't do anything. Verse 23, the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift him out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. So he didn't bow down and worship the image that was required. He didn't go with everyone else. He was different again. He chose to be different again. And for that, he got thrown in the lion's den. But then the king sees that he's not been killed. And he's actually pleased about this. So verse 25, again, we love this. The King Darius wrote to all the nations. Now, it's not King Nebuchadnezzar, it's now King Darius. He wrote to all the nations and the peoples of every language in the earth. May you prosper greatly. Verse 26, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Daniel's God is the man. He's the one. Follow him. For he is this. You have to understand this. These words. It says, he is the living God. So this is not a Christian saying this. It's not like if I said to you, oh, tell me about God and tell me what's great about God. Well, yeah, he's the living God. This is like if I went out onto the street and spoke to a stranger who has no belief at all, or maybe even believes in something else, and said, tell me about God. And they said, he's the living God. His kingdom will not be destroyed. These are the words of the king here. It says that he rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders. He's testifying about God. He's testifying about not somebody who's grown up as a Christian or even that we know is saved. But he's testifying about God. He says he performs signs and wonders in heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. He's testifying about God. I think that's just incredible. Why? Because Daniel chose to be different. Daniel chose to be different, and so he showed a way that you can be. The king didn't realise that was true. He didn't realise that could be the case. He didn't understand. But then he couldn't deny it. The king had no choice but to make this incredible declaration about God. He had no choice. He couldn't deny what he'd seen and experienced. He had to testify about the greatness of God. So Daniel creates an evangelist out of the king. Just by being different, he makes the king an evangelist, because you understand the influence of this king. He said he wrote to the nations and every part of his kingdom. So the influence that Daniel had on the king used his influence to then honour God. Difference making. Difference making because he was different. Because he was different. You see, here's a conclusion. Daniel and his friends, they had a legacy. Daniel and his friends had a legacy. So like that, Daniel and his friends. They had a legacy. I grew up watching a program in the 80s called Spider-Man and Friends. It's a 1980s cartoon, Spider-Man and Friends, and they'd go out on adventures and they'd save the day and then they'd come back and all live together in a flat, and cook together and kind of argued about, whose time it is to do washing up. But during the day, they'd go out and rescue the world from, and this is Daniel and his friends, they're going out and rescuing everyone. Daniel and his friends, they're going out and just saving the day. Here's what they did. You understand the significance of what they did? They changed the kingdom. They changed a kingdom. They brought regime change. See, this is language that we understand now in the context of international events, regime change, and trying to bring regime change. They did that. By being different, the kings that they served under changed the laws in favour of God. In favour of God. They made God famous. In the godless kingdom, in the kingdom where they served other kings and also other gods, they made God famous. So God counted above all the other gods. So yeah, we've had these gods, but really this is the one. Look at what he does. Look at what he does. He's incredible. Please, everyone needs to pay attention to this God, to the God of Daniel. See, they became difference makers because they were different. Because they took a stand and were different. And I want us maybe just to be really encouraged by this, that the difference that you can make sometimes is not even that you're going and saying, have you been saved? Are you saved? Do you believe in Jesus? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? And these kind of things that maybe we say, we just, have you given your life to Jesus? These are important questions. But sometimes, just you being different. Just you being different. Taking a stand, saying, oh no, this is the way I'm going to live. I'm going to live this way. See that? Look what happens there. I said it to you before that I have friends now that I'm still friends with, maybe sometimes getting on for 20 years, who I've talked to about, and I spoke to about my decision making and the reason why I was being different. And I said to them, I'm being different for this reason, because this is what's going to happen, or because God's going to do this. And because they're still in my life, some of those people, I've been able to stand now and say to them, look what God does. Look what he does. I told you, didn't I? I didn't make that decision. I was different in that situation because I knew God was going to do this. I knew God was going to position me like this. And so I don't come with an arrogance of my own. For me, it's like, look at how good God is. Can you see how good God is? I told you that. You didn't believe me at the time. You thought I was a bit silly, didn't you? You thought I was a bit, really? Why just do what everyone else does? It's fine. It's not a problem. It doesn't make sense. But that makes sense. They understand. They understand. You see, let me ask you this question. What will be the legacy of your life? What will be the legacy of my life? Maybe in your everyday life, you can be the one that doesn't pile in when everyone's bad mouthing the bosses. Maybe that's your difference. Maybe you being different. Maybe where it starts. Maybe you're not the one who enters into the gossip with everyone else about, well, who's doing what. You don't do that. And people are like, well, what's that? You don't pick on the new starter. That's the way everyone does. Yeah, they pick on the new starter. You don't do that. Or whatever that difference is for you, in your context, whatever that difference is for you, you can do that and you can be a difference maker just by doing that. Just by making that stand, taking that stand, not saying that word, not making that joke, not laughing at that thing, not whatever it is for you. See, we need to be different, not just to be contrary, not just for the sake of it, oh, I'm just going to be different. Don't look at each other, by the way. When you talk to somebody, there's some people you talk to, maybe even some people you live with, and it's like they're just different for the sake of it. They're just to rub you up the wrong way. It's like, you say one thing, they're going to say the other thing. Just, just saying going to say the other thing, because it's you said it, so I'm going to say the opposite. You're going to say red, so you're going to say black, so I'm going to say white. We're not doing that. We're not being different just to be contrary. But the purpose is to show who God is. Not just to be oppositional, not just to try and be difficult, not because I'm different, because God is great. So Daniel and his friends were different because they knew God was great. And they wanted people to see that God was great. So the challenge is this. The challenge of difference is this. Being different, it sets you apart. Exposes you a bit, doesn't it? When you're different, exposes you a bit. It's a bit. It invites questions, maybe even ridicule. I've experienced that. For some, maybe even hostility. So, who are you to be different? Why are you doing that? And sometimes it requires for you to explain yourself. Maybe for some of you, the fear is about, well, I don't want to have to explain myself. God will give you the answers that you need. God will give you them. The starting point, though, is to sometimes just be different. Don't run from the challenge, embrace it. Stand with friends and encourage each other in your difference making, in being different. Encourage each other in being different. Will you be the difference to make a difference? That's the question. Will you be different to make a difference, to be a difference maker? Sometimes, for many, and for all of these great figures in the Bible, their starting story, a part of their core origin story is that they were different. They were different. How can we show who God is if we are like everyone else? If we just do what everyone else does? If we live the way that everyone else does? How can we show that God is different, that God is amazing? We can't do it. It's easier to blend in. It's an easier life. Quieter, just like no hassle, just, don't attract any attention. It's easier to do that. But God is calling us to be different, to make a difference, to show who God is. Because when we step forward, God steps forward and says, oh, okay, I'm going to come through for you. I'm going to show them that this is it. And if you're in it long enough, as I've been in it long enough, at least at this stage, I can testify to people and say, look what's happening now. Look how God provided this. Look how God did this. Look how God positioned us this way. Because I took that stand 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 5 years ago. I did that. I was different. Because God required me to be. Consider that. The power of difference, being a difference maker. Let's just stand. I'm conscious of time. We are born for more than just to fill a seat here, to have a nice time and go home. We're born for more than that. We are. And God wants to show us that way. He wants to show you the way. So for each of your circumstances, for each of your situations, your relationships, your context, God wants to show you how can you be different. What's the difference making that you can show? Just in being who you are. Let's just pray. Lord, we pray, Lord, today that you would inspire us again. Inspire us again, Lord, by stories of Daniel and his friends, of what it is that you can do for people who will take a stand for you. Lord, show us your ways. Show us how we can be different. Show us how, Lord, we can take a stand for you. That we will, Lord, walk not in arrogance, but, Lord, in a quiet confidence in you, in who you are. And that we will take stands and we will take positions and we will show the way that you are through our stands. Lord, inspire us, direct us. Lord, even as we go into this week, through these days and these coming weeks, that you will show us situations where, Lord, we can be different. And we can just shine out who you are. Not even just from what we say, but just who we are, how we live. We thank you that you have called us to be difference makers, and Lord, that we can be difference makers just by being different. By being who you are, in a world that doesn't have any clue who you are. Your word says as though you were making your appeal through us. But we know that you can make your appeal through us, Lord, living your way. Your word says the way of the righteous winds upwards. So Lord, we pray that you would cause our way to wind upwards, that you would favour us. Lord, in the workplace, in the family context, out in the business world, in whatever sector that we are, that Lord, you would favour us as we take stands for you. So Lord, there would be promotions, there would be, Lord, stories and credit that would come about you from the stand that we take. That people would understand how great you are through who we are. Lord, in our workplace, in our families, in our holidays, whatever it is. We would be who you have called us to be as difference makers. We would fulfill our destiny. Fulfill our destiny. Yeah, in Jesus' name. Jesus' name. Amen. 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 Well, be encouraged. You are a difference maker already just by being different. Just stick around. We have time for refreshments. We love to kind of just to encourage each other, talk about your situations and how you can move forward and be a difference maker with each other. Do this together. Amen. Amen.